The stranger collapsed against the wooden post outside the general store, just as the sun began its slow descent behind the jagged peaks. Her eyes glazed with exhaustion and her lips cracked from thirst that had nothing to do with the dry New Mexico air. Elias Northwood had been tying his horse to the hitching rail when he saw her knees buckle, and his reflexes moved faster than his mind, catching her before she hit the dusty ground. The woman was light as a sparrow in his arms, too light, and when she looked up at him with those wide brown eyes that seemed too large for her face, he knew immediately that she was starving. "When did you last eat?" he asked, his voice rough from a day spent herding cattle through the scrubland outside Socorro. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. She swallowed hard, wincing as if even that simple action caused her pain. 5 days, she finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of a wagon rattling past on the main street. "Maybe 6, I lost count." Elias felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen plenty of hard luck cases in his 26 years, especially here in the territories where life was unforgiving and the land took more than it gave. But there was something about this woman, something in the way she tried to straighten her spine even as she sagged against him, that made him want to help her. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with dark hair that hung in tangled waves past her shoulders and a dress that had once been blue but was now stained with dust and sweat. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, but when she tried to take a step, her legs gave out again. Elias made a decision without thinking twice about it. He scooped her up properly, one arm under her knees and the other supporting her back, and carried her down the street toward the boarding house where he kept a room when he was in town. She did not protest, which told him more about her condition than words ever could. A woman alone in the territories learned to be wary of strange men, but she was too weak even for that. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner, took one look at the woman in his arms and clicked her tongue. Upstairs, second door on the right. I will bring water." Elias took the stairs 2 at a time, mindful not to jostle his burden too much. His room was simple but clean, with a bed, a washstand, and a small table with 2 chairs. He laid her gently on the bed, then went to the window to open it wider, letting in what little breeze existed in the late afternoon heat. When he turned back, she was watching him with those huge eyes, and he saw fear there now, mixed with something else he could not quite name. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly. "My name is Elias Northwood. I work at the Double Bar Ranch about 10 miles south of here. You are safe." "Rose," she whispered. "Rose Daniels." Mrs. Henderson bustled in with a pitcher of water and a glass, setting them on the table with the efficiency of someone who had seen everything in her 60 years. "Slow sips," she warned Rose. "You drink too fast on an empty stomach, and you will make yourself sick." Elias poured the water and brought it to Rose, helping her sit up enough to drink. She took the advice, sipping carefully, though he could see how badly she wanted to gulp it down. When she had drunk half the glass, he set it aside and looked at Mrs. Henderson. "I need to go to the market before it closes," he said. "Can you stay with her?" "Go on," the older woman said. "I will make sure she does not try to get up and hurt herself." The market was still open, though the vendors were beginning to pack up for the day. Elias moved quickly, buying bacon, eggs, potatoes, onions, beans, cornmeal, salt pork, dried beef, flour, and canned tomatoes. He added fresh bread from the bakery and a jar of honey, then stopped at the butcher for fresh steaks and chicken. The butcher raised an eyebrow at the amount of food, but Elias just paid and loaded everything into his saddlebags in a canvas sack. By the time he got back to the boarding house, the sun had set, and lamps were being lit all along the main street. Rose was still in the bed, propped up on pillows now, with Mrs. Henderson sitting in the chair beside her. The older woman stood when he entered. "She drank more water," Mrs. Henderson reported. "And she told me a bit of her story. Poor thing came out here with her brother to start a ranch, but he died of fever 3 weeks back. She has been trying to make it on her own, but ran out of money and food. Pride kept her from asking for help until it was almost too late." Elias looked at Rose, who had turned her face away, her cheeks flushed with shame. "No need for pride here," he said gently. "Everybody needs help sometimes." He set the canvas sack on the table and began unpacking. "I am going to cook," he announced, "and you are going to eat as much as you can manage without making yourself sick. Mrs. Henderson, would you mind bringing up a skillet and a pot?" Already thought of that, the landlady said, producing both from behind the door where she had left them. I will leave you two alone. Rose, if you need anything, you call out. I will be downstairs. After she left, Elias built a small fire in the room's fireplace, which was usually only used in winter but would serve well enough for cooking now. He started with the simplest thing first, slicing bacon into the skillet and setting it over the flames. The smell filled the room immediately, rich and savory, and he heard Rose make a small sound. "Smells good, doesn't it?" he said, not looking at her, trying to give her some dignity. "I dreamed about food," she said softly. "Every night. Ridiculous dreams where I was eating and never getting full." "Not ridiculous," Elias replied, turning the bacon with a fork. "Your body telling you what it needs." While the bacon cooked, he peeled potatoes and sliced them thin, then chopped an onion. When the bacon was crispy, he removed it to a plate and used the grease to fry the potatoes and onions together, adding salt and pepper from his own supplies. He had learned to cook on the trail, where a man either learned to feed himself or went hungry, and he had discovered he had a knack for it. Next, he scrambled eggs in the bacon grease, cooking them slow and soft the way his mother had taught him years ago. He toasted bread on the edge of the skillet, then assembled everything on 2 plates, dividing the food evenly. It was more than Rose should probably eat after 5 days of nothing, but he figured she could take what she could manage and save the rest. He brought 1 plate to her, along with a fork and a clean napkin. She stared at it like it was a miracle, her eyes filling with tears. "Go ahead," he said gently. "Eat as much as you want." Rose picked up the fork with a trembling hand and speared a piece of bacon. She brought it to her mouth slowly, as if she could not quite believe it was real, then closed her lips around it. Elias watched as her eyes closed and a tear slipped down her cheek. She chewed slowly, savoring every second, then swallowed. When she opened her eyes again, they were bright with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he said with a small smile. "There is plenty more where that came from." He sat at the table with his own plate and ate, but mostly he watched her. Rose ate slowly, carefully, taking small bites and chewing thoroughly. She finished the bacon first, then moved to the potatoes and onions, eating with a focus that spoke of deep hunger. The eggs were next, and finally she picked up the toast, spreading a bit of the honey he had brought on it. Halfway through the toast, she set down her fork and put a hand to her stomach. "I want to keep eating," she said, "but I feel so full." "That is all right," Elias assured her. "Your stomach has shrunk. It will take a few days to get back to normal. Save the rest for later, or I can heat it up for you in a couple of hours if you get hungry again." She nodded and leaned back against the pillows, her hand still on her stomach. "I cannot remember the last time I felt this full. It is almost uncomfortable, but in the best possible way." Elias collected the plates and set them aside, then began preparing more food for the next few days. He put beans on to soak, knowing they would need to cook slowly tomorrow. He wrapped the fresh steaks in cloth and set them in the coolest corner of the room. The bread went into a tin to keep it fresh. He organized everything methodically, very aware of Rose watching him from the bed. "Why are you doing this?" she asked after a while. "You do not know me. I could be anyone." He paused, a bag of cornmeal in his hands, and considered the question. "I guess because someone helped me once when I needed it," he said finally. "About 5 years back, I got caught in a flash flood out in the territories. Lost my horse, my supplies, everything. A Navajo family found me half dead and took me in, fed me, gave me a horse, and sent me on my way. Never asked for anything in return. I figured the least I can do is pass that kindness along." Rose was quiet for a moment. "That's a good reason," she said softly. He finished organizing the supplies, then banked the fire so it would not go out completely. "I'm going to sleep in the chair tonight," he said. "You take the bed. Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next." "I cannot take your bed," Rose protested weakly. "You already did," he pointed out, "and I have slept in worse places than a chair. Rest, Rose. You need it more than anything else right now." She did not argue further, too exhausted to fight. Elias pulled the chair over near the window where it was cooler and settled into it, tilting his hat down over his eyes. He heard Rose shift on the bed, getting comfortable, and then her breathing began to slow and deepen. Within minutes, she was asleep. Elias did not sleep much that night. He kept thinking about the woman in his bed, about how close she had come to dying right there on the street in Socorro. It made him angry, the way the world could be so cruel to someone just trying to survive. Her brother had died, and she had been left with nothing. No family, no money, no food. Just pride and determination, which only went so far when your body was eating itself from the inside. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, Elias stood and stretched, working the kinks out of his shoulders. Rose was still asleep, her face peaceful in a way it had not been the night before. He decided to let her rest and headed downstairs to use the kitchen properly. Mrs. Henderson was already up, kneading bread dough at the big table. "How is she?" the landlady asked. "Still sleeping. I want to make her a real breakfast. Would you mind if I used your kitchen?" "Help yourself. There's fresh coffee on the stove." Elias poured himself a cup of the strong black coffee and got to work. He made flapjacks from scratch, mixing flour, eggs, milk, and a bit of sugar into a smooth batter. While the griddle heated, he fried more bacon and made a pot of oatmeal with cinnamon and honey. He scrambled more eggs, this time adding a bit of cream to make them richer, and toasted more bread. By the time he carried the tray upstairs, the smell had woken Rose. She was sitting up in bed looking more alert than she had the night before, though still painfully thin. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "I hope you are hungry because I made enough to feed half the territory." Her eyes widened at the sight of the tray loaded with food. "I do not know if I can eat all of that." "Eat what you can," he said, setting the tray on her lap. "The rest will keep." This time she ate with more appetite, though still carefully. The flapjacks disappeared first, drowned in honey, followed by half the eggs and several pieces of bacon. She sipped the coffee gratefully, and Elias was pleased to see color beginning to return to her cheeks. "Tell me about your brother," he said gently, "if you want to talk about it." Rose was quiet for a moment, her fork hovering over the oatmeal. "His name was Thomas," she said finally. "He was 5 years older than me. Our parents died when I was 16, and Thomas raised me. He always dreamed of having his own ranch, and when he saved up enough money, we came out here. We bought land about 15 miles north of Socorro, nothing fancy, just a small cabin and a few acres. But it was ours." She paused, swallowing hard. The fever came on fast. One day he was fine, and the next he was burning up. I tried everything, but nothing helped. He died 3 days later. I buried him on the property, under a cottonwood tree he loved. "I'm sorry," Elias said quietly. "After he died, I did not know what to do. The land was paid for, but we had spent most of our savings getting set up. I had a little money left, but not enough. I tried to make it stretch, but I'm not very good at hunting, and I did not want to come into town and face questions. Stupid pride." She laughed bitterly. "Thomas always said my pride would be the death of me. He was almost right." "What do you want to do now?" Elias asked. "Do you want to keep the land?" Rose looked down at her hands. "I do not know. Part of me wants to try for Thomas, but I do not know if I can do it alone. Ranching is hard work, even for 2 people. For one woman alone, it might be impossible." "Maybe not alone," Elias heard himself say. "I could help you, not forever, but for a while. Help you get set up properly, teach you what you need to know. Then you could decide if you want to keep going or sell and move on." Rose looked at him with those wide eyes, surprise written all over her face. "Why would you do that? You have your own job at the Double Bar." "The foreman owes me some time off," Elias said. "I've been working straight through for almost a year without a break, and like I said, I believe in passing kindness along." The truth was more complicated than that, though he did not quite understand it himself yet. There was something about Rose that drew him in, made him want to protect her and help her. Maybe it was the combination of vulnerability and strength he saw in her, the way she had kept going even when she had every reason to give up. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he was just lonely, and she was too. And this felt like a chance for both of them to be less alone, at least for a little while. Rose ate more of her breakfast while she thought about his offer. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but I cannot pay you." "I am not asking for payment," Elias said firmly. "Consider it a favor between friends." "We just met," Rose pointed out. "Then consider it a favor between future friends," he amended, and was rewarded with a small smile. Over the next 3 days, Elias stayed at the boarding house with Rose, cooking meal after meal and watching her slowly regain her strength. He made beef stew with vegetables and thick gravy, roasted chicken with potatoes, beans and cornbread, fried steaks with onions, and more eggs and bacon than he could count. Rose ate it all, slowly but steadily, and the hollows in her cheeks began to fill in. Her eyes grew brighter, and she started to move without that terrible weakness that had defined her when he first found her. They talked a lot during those 3 days. Rose told him about growing up in Missouri, about her mother who had been a schoolteacher, and her father who had worked at the mill. She told him about Thomas and his dreams, about the journey west that had been full of hope and possibility. Elias told her about his own childhood in Texas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 14, and making his own way ever since. He told her about the years he had spent drifting from ranch to ranch, learning the trade, becoming the cowboy he was now. They discovered they had things in common. Both loved early mornings when the world was quiet. Both preferred coffee black and strong. Both had a stubborn streak that sometimes got them into trouble. Rose had a quick wit that surprised him, and she made him laugh more than once with her dry observations about life in the territories. On the 4th day, Rose declared she was ready to go back to her property. Elias was not entirely sure she was strong enough yet, but he understood the need to go home, to face what had to be faced. He rented a wagon from the livery, loaded all the supplies he had bought plus more, and helped Rose up onto the seat beside him. His horse was tied to the back, and they set off early in the morning when the air was still cool. The ride north took about 3 hours. The land was beautiful in a harsh way, all red rock and scrubland dotted with juniper and pinon trees. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow even in late spring. They passed through a small canyon where the rock walls rose up on either side, casting cool shadows across the trail, then emerged onto a high plain. Rose's property sat at the base of a low mesa with a small cabin, a barn that needed repairs, and a corral that had seen better days. The cottonwood tree she had mentioned stood about 50 yards from the cabin, its leaves rustling in the breeze. Elias could see a fresh mound of earth beneath it and knew that was where Thomas was buried. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin and helped Rose down. She stood for a moment just looking at the place, and he saw grief wash over her face. Then she straightened her shoulders and walked to the cabin door, pushing it open. Inside, it was clear she had left in a hurry. A chair was overturned, dishes sat dirty in the basin, and a thin layer of dust covered everything. But it was structurally sound, with a good fireplace, a decent stove, and a loft for sleeping. The single room was not large, but it was enough for one person, or even two if they did not mind being close. Elias started unloading the wagon while Rose moved through the cabin, touching things, reacquainting herself with her home. He brought in all the food supplies, stacking them neatly on the shelves in the table. Then he brought in the rest: a new axe, rope, nails, tools for repairs, seed for a kitchen garden, and even a few chickens he had bought that morning, squawking in their crate. By late afternoon, the wagon was empty and the cabin was full. Elias had fixed the corral fence, patched a hole in the barn roof, and set the chickens up in a small coop he built from spare wood. Rose had cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, washing everything and putting it all back in order. She moved slower than she would have before her ordeal, but she was determined, and he let her work at her own pace. When evening came, Elias cooked again, this time using the cabin stove. He made a simple meal of beans and rice with bacon, and they ate at the small table while the light faded outside the windows. "You did not have to do all this," Rose said quietly. "The repairs, the supplies, the chickens, it is too much." "It is what was needed," Elias replied, "and I do not mind. Actually, I have enjoyed it. Feels good to build something instead of just maintaining what already exists." Rose looked at him across the table, her eyes serious. "I do not know how to repay you. I told you I am not looking for repayment." "But you must want something," she insisted. "Nobody does this much for a stranger without wanting something in return." Elias thought about that. What did he want? The truth was complicated. He wanted to see her succeed. He wanted to know she would be all right. And somewhere along the way, in the past few days, he had started to want something else too, something he was not quite ready to name. "Maybe just your friendship," he said finally. "I do not have much of that. The cowboy life is pretty lonely most of the time." Rose's expression softened. "You have that already. You have had that since you caught me before I hit the ground." They cleaned up the dishes together, moving around the small cabin with an ease that felt natural. When everything was put away, Elias realized that he had not thought about where he would sleep. The cabin had only one bed, up in the loft. "You can take the bed," Rose said, reading his thoughts. "I will sleep down here. There are enough blankets to make a pallet on the floor." "Absolutely not," Elias said firmly. "You are still recovering. You need the bed. I will be fine down here. Honestly, a pallet on the floor is luxury compared to some places I've slept." They argued about it for a while, but Elias won through sheer stubbornness. Rose finally climbed the ladder to the loft, and he made himself comfortable on the floor near the fireplace, which he kept banked low for warmth. He could hear her moving around up there, getting settled, and then silence. "Elias?" Her voice came softly through the darkness. "Yeah? Thank you. For everything. I mean it." "You're welcome, Rose. Sleep well." He lay awake for a while, listening to the night sounds outside. Coyotes called in the distance and an owl hooted from somewhere near the barn. The fire crackled softly, and up in the loft he could hear Rose's steady breathing as she slept. It felt right, being here, helping her. It felt like purpose, and he had not felt that in a long time. The next morning, Elias woke before dawn and slipped outside to tend to the animals. He checked on the chickens, who had settled into their new home and were already scratching around for bugs. His horse needed grooming and fresh water. The barn needed more repairs than he had realized, but nothing he could not handle. He was measuring boards for a new stall when Rose appeared in the barn doorway, a cup of coffee in each hand. She had pulled her hair back in a braid, and she was wearing a different dress, this one brown and more practical for work. "I figured you could use this," she said, handing him one of the cups. "You figured right." He took a grateful sip. "You make good coffee." "Thomas taught me. He said coffee was the most important skill for surviving out here." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. They worked together all morning. Rose was not strong enough yet for the heavy labor, but she helped where she could, handing him tools and holding boards steady while he nailed them in place. They talked while they worked, the conversation flowing easily. Elias found himself telling her things he had not talked about in years, about his dreams of maybe having his own place someday, about the loneliness of cowboy life, about the beauty he found in the harsh landscape. Rose talked about Thomas more, sharing memories that made her laugh and cry in equal measure. Elias listened, understanding that she needed to talk about her brother, to keep his memory alive. Around midday they took a break, sitting in the shade of the barn with cool water from the well. Rose was quiet for a while, looking out at the property. "I think I want to try," she said finally. "To make this work, I mean. It is what Thomas wanted, and I think it is what I want too. But I am scared. I do not know if I can do it." "You can," Elias said with certainty. "You are stronger than you think. You survived 5 days without food. Most people would have given up long before that." "I almost did give up," Rose admitted. "That day you found me, I decided to walk into town and ask for help, even though I was terrified. I thought maybe I could find work, or maybe someone would take pity on me. I never expected someone like you." "Someone like me?" "Kind," she said simply. "Genuinely kind, without expecting anything in return. That is rare out here. That is rare anywhere." Elias felt his face warm and was glad for the shadow of his hat. "I am just doing what anyone should do." "But they don't," Rose said. "That is the point. Most people would have walked right past me, or they would have helped but expected payment I could not give. You are different." They went back to work after that, but something had shifted. The air felt charged with an awareness that had not been there before. Elias found himself very conscious of Rose's presence, of the way she moved, the sound of her voice, the rare smile that lit up her face. He told himself it was just gratitude, that she was vulnerable and he was helping her, and anything he felt beyond friendship was inappropriate. But the feelings persisted, growing stronger each hour they spent together. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Elias rode into Socorro to send word to the double bar that he was taking the time off he was owed, and the foreman, though grumbling, agreed. He bought more supplies and returned to Rose's property, where they worked from dawn to dusk, transforming the struggling homestead into something viable. They repaired the barn completely, replaced broken fence posts, cleared the irrigation ditch that brought water from a spring higher up on the mesa, and planted a large kitchen garden. Elias taught Rose how to shoot properly, and they went hunting together, bringing back rabbits and quail to supplement their supplies. Rose proved to be a quick learner, mastering skills that would help her survive alone when he eventually had to leave. Except he was thinking about that less and less. Leaving, that is. The idea of going back to the double bar, to the bunkhouse, and the endless routine of ranch work held less and less appeal. What appealed to him was this: waking up to the smell of coffee that Rose had made, working side by side with her all day, cooking dinner together in the small cabin, and talking late into the night about everything and nothing. He was falling in love with her. He knew it, even though he tried to deny it. It was there in the way his heart beat faster when she laughed, in the way he looked for excuses to stand close to her, in the way he lay awake at night, thinking about her sleeping in the loft above him. He had never felt this way about anyone before, and it scared him. What if she did not feel the same way? What if she still saw him only as the man who had helped her when she was desperate? Rose, for her part, was changing too. The gaunt, desperate woman he had found in Socorro was gone, replaced by someone stronger and more confident. She had gained weight, her cheeks full and her eyes bright with health. She smiled more often, and sometimes he caught her watching him with an expression he could not quite read. He wanted to think it was affection, maybe even love, but he was afraid to hope for that. One evening, about 6 weeks after they had arrived at the property, they were sitting outside the cabin watching the sunset. The sky was ablaze with orange and pink and purple, the colors reflected in the windows of the cabin. Rose had cooked dinner that night, insisting that Elias had done enough and it was her turn. She had made a surprisingly good stew, and they had eaten their fill. "I have been thinking," Rose said, breaking the comfortable silence. "About what?" "About how to make this place profitable. I cannot just survive here. I need to build something that will support me in the long term. I was thinking maybe I could raise chickens and sell eggs in Socorro, and maybe goats. They do well in this climate, and I could sell the milk and cheese." "That's a good plan," Elias said, "practical and achievable. You would need to build up your stock slowly, but it could work. Would you help me? Not forever, I know you have your own life. But maybe just to get started?" Elias looked at her, at the hope and determination in her face, and knew he could not say no, did not want to say no. "Of course I will help, as long as you need me." "I will always need you," Rose said softly, then seemed to realize what she had said. Her eyes widened and she looked away quickly. "I mean, you have become a good friend. I do not know what I would have done without you." Elias's heart was pounding. He wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her that he felt the same way, that he did not want to leave, that he wanted to stay here with her and build a life together. But fear held him back. What if he was misreading everything? What if he ruined the friendship they had built? "Rose," he started, then stopped, not knowing how to continue. She looked at him, waiting, and he saw something in her eyes that gave him courage. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I hope it does not make things strange between us, but I cannot keep it to myself anymore." "What is it?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I have feelings for you, more than friendship. I think I have had them for a while now, but I did not want to admit it. You were vulnerable, and I was helping you, and it seemed wrong to feel this way. But I cannot help it. I care about you, Rose, more than I have ever cared about anyone." Rose was silent for a long moment, and Elias felt his stomach drop. He had ruined everything. But then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. "I care about you too," she said quietly. "I've been trying to figure out if it was real or if I just felt this way because you saved my life. But it is real, Elias. When I think about you leaving someday, it makes my heart hurt. I do not want you to go." Elias felt like he could not breathe. "You mean that?" "I mean it." She turned to face him fully, still holding his hand. "I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that first night, when you cooked for me and watched me eat like it was the most important thing in the world. Nobody has ever taken care of me like that." He reached up with his free hand and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "I love you too. God, Rose, I love you so much." When they kissed, it felt like coming home. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them afraid of breaking the spell. Then Rose's arms went around his neck and Elias pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, pouring all his feelings into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, He rested his forehead against hers. "What do we do now?" Rose asked. "I want to stay," Elias said. "If you will have me, I want to help you build this place into something real. I want to be with you." "Yes," Rose said immediately. "Yes, please stay. I want that too. I want you here with me." They sat there holding each other as the last light faded from the sky, both marveling at how their lives had changed in just a few short weeks. Elias had thought he was just helping a stranger, but he had found something far more valuable. He had found love, and purpose, and a home. The next morning they woke up different people. Elias climbed down from the loft where he had finally slept in the bed with Rose, though they had done nothing but hold each other and talk late into the night. They had talked about their plans, about what it would mean to build a life together, about all the work ahead of them. And then they had just held each other, grateful for this unexpected gift they had been given. Over the following months, they worked harder than ever. Elias rode to the double bar and officially resigned, collecting the wages he was owed and saying goodbye to the few friends he had there. Then he came back to the property that was beginning to feel like his own, to the woman who had become the center of his world. They bought goats, 6 females, and a buck, and built a proper shelter for them. They expanded the chicken coop and added more hens. The garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables that Rose began selling in Socorro along with eggs. It was not much money at first, but it was something, and it grew steadily. Elias built a smokehouse and taught Rose how to cure meat. They hunted together regularly now, and Rose had become a decent shot. They put up preserves for the winter, filling the cabin's shelves with jars of vegetables and fruit. They worked on the cabin itself, adding a proper bedroom on the ground floor so the loft could be used for storage. Through it all, their love grew deeper. They learned each other's habits and quirks, the way couples do. Rose learned that Elias was grumpy in the mornings until he had his coffee, and that he sang quietly to himself when he was working alone. Elias learned that Rose was fiercely competitive about even silly things, and that she cried easily but never for long. They had their first fight about something stupid, about how to stack firewood, and then laughed about it afterward, making up with kisses. In September, 6 months after that day in Socorro when Elias had caught Rose as she fell, he asked her to marry him. They were at the cottonwood tree, the place where Thomas was buried. Rose had wanted to tell her brother about them, even though he was gone. "Thomas would have liked you," Rose said, her hand on the rough bark of the tree. "I wish I could have known him," Elias replied. "He raised a remarkable woman." Rose smiled. "He would have appreciated that you took care of me. He was always worried about what would happen to me if something happened to him. I think he would be glad to know I'm not alone." Elias took her hand and dropped to one knee right there beneath the tree. "Rose Daniels, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I do not have much to offer except myself and my promise to love you and take care of you for the rest of my life. But that is yours if you want it." Rose started crying, but she was smiling too, that brilliant smile that made her whole face light up. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, of course I will marry you." They were married in Socorro 3 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at the church with Mrs. Henderson and a few other townspeople as witnesses. Rose wore a new dress that she had made herself, pale yellow with lace at the collar. Elias wore his best shirt and pants, his hair neatly combed for once. The ceremony was short, but when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Elias kissed his bride, he felt like the luckiest man alive. They spent their wedding night in the boarding house, in the very room where Elias had first cooked for Rose, and it felt like closing a circle. The next morning, they returned to their property, to their home, ready to start their married life together. The first winter was hard, but they weathered it together, staying warm by the fire and making plans for the spring. They added more livestock, including a cow for milk and eventually 2 horses for working the land. Rose's business grew steadily, and soon she was selling eggs, cheese, milk, and preserved goods to several families in Socorro. Elias hired himself out occasionally for ranch work when they needed extra money, but mostly he stayed at home, working their land and building their future. In the spring, Rose discovered she was pregnant. They were both nervous and excited, preparing as best they could for the baby's arrival. Elias built a cradle from wood he had carefully selected and sanded smooth. Rose sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands always busy. They argued good-naturedly about names, unable to agree on anything until the baby actually arrived. Their son was born on a hot day in July, screaming lustily and already showing signs of his father's dark hair. They named him Thomas after Rose's brother, and Elias cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by love and fear and hope all mixed together. Thomas was a good baby, generally happy and healthy. Rose proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving even when she was exhausted. Elias did his share too, walking the floor with his son at night, changing diapers without complaint, and singing the same songs his own father had sung to him. Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. It was harder in some ways, with less sleep and more to worry about. But it was also richer, fuller, every day bringing new discoveries as Thomas grew and changed. His first smile, at 6 weeks old, melted both his parents. His first laugh, at 3 months, made them laugh too. His first word was, "Mama," which made Rose cry happy tears. The property continued to prosper. They expanded the house, adding a real second bedroom and a larger kitchen. They bought more land when the neighbor to the south decided to move back east, doubling their acreage. They built a proper dairy barn for the goats and cows, and the egg business grew large enough that Rose had to hire a girl from town to help with the deliveries. When Thomas was 2, Rose got pregnant again. This time, it was a daughter, born in the spring with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Sarah, and she was the perfect addition to their family, sweet-tempered and curious about everything. Elias sometimes still thought about that day in Socorro, about the woman who had collapsed against the post outside the general store, too weak to even stand. He thought about how close he had come to not being there, to not catching her, to not cooking that first meal and watching her eat. His whole life had changed in that moment, though he had not known it at the time. He had thought he was just helping someone in need, but he had found his purpose, his home, his family. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they stood together beneath the cottonwood tree, Thomas holding his father's hand and Sarah in her mother's arms. They had brought flowers to put on Thomas Daniels's grave, and Rose was talking quietly to her brother, telling him about her life. "We are doing well, Thomas," she said softly. "The ranch is thriving. We have 2 beautiful children. Elias takes good care of us, just like you would have wanted. I miss you every day, but I am happy. So happy. Thank you for bringing me out here, for believing we could make a life in this place. I wish you were here to see it all, but I think you know somehow. I think you are watching over us." Elias put his arm around his wife, holding his family close. "Thank you," he said to the grave, to the memory of the man he had never met, for raising her right, for teaching her to be strong, for everything. Young Thomas tugged on his father's hand. "Why are we thanking Uncle Thomas?" he asked. "Because without him, none of this would exist," Elias explained, crouching down to his son's level. "He brought your mother here, and he taught her how to survive, and because of that, she was here when I found her. And now we have this wonderful family and this beautiful home. So, we are grateful to him." Thomas nodded seriously, trying to understand. Then he said, "Can we go see the baby goats now?" Rose laughed, and it was pure joy. "Yes, we can go see the baby goats." As they walked back to the house, Elias thought about how much had changed in 5 years. The struggling homestead had become a prosperous small ranch. The desperate starving woman and the lonely cowboy had become husband and wife, parents to 2 healthy children. The empty cabin had become a home filled with love and laughter. Life was not always easy. They had lean times when the weather was bad or animals got sick. They had nights when the children were ill and they stayed up worried and praying. They had arguments, as all couples do, about money or work or how to handle situations. But through it all, they had each other, and that made everything bearable. Elias still cooked as he had that first night, though now he usually had help in the kitchen. Rose had become a good cook herself, and young Thomas loved to help, standing on a stool to stir pots and feeling very important. Family dinners were loud and chaotic, with Thomas chattering about his day and Sarah making a mess with her food, but they were perfect in their own way. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Elias and Rose would sit outside and watch the sunset, just as they had that night when they had first confessed their feelings. They did not need to talk much. Just being together was enough, their hands linked, their shoulders touching, comfortable in the silence that came from truly knowing another person. "Do you ever regret it?" Rose asked one such evening. "Giving up the cowboy life? You could have kept drifting, seeing new places, staying free." "Not even once," Elias said firmly. "This is what I want. You, the children, this place. This is freedom, Rose, real freedom. Not running from place to place, never belonging anywhere. This is home." "I love you," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "I love you too. Always." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved working with the animals, showing a natural talent for it that made his father proud. Sarah was more adventurous, always climbing things she should not and getting into trouble, but with such charm that it was hard to stay angry at her. When Thomas was 7 and Sarah was 5, Rose had another baby, another boy they named William. He was the easiest of their children, content to watch the world with wide, curious eyes. Thomas took his role as big brother seriously, always making sure William was safe. Sarah was less impressed with the new baby at first, jealous of the attention, but soon came around and appointed herself his protector too. The ranch continued to grow. They now had a substantial herd of goats, several cows, dozens of chickens, and had even added sheep. The dairy and egg business was thriving, and they were known throughout Socorro and the surrounding area for the quality of their products. Elias had also developed a reputation as a skilled horseman, and people sometimes brought difficult horses to him for training, providing additional income. Life was full and good, and Elias sometimes had to pinch himself to believe it was real. He had been so lonely before Rose, drifting through life without purpose or direction. Now, every day had meaning. Every challenge was worth facing because he was facing it with her. Every triumph was sweeter because he could share it with his family. When their oldest son Thomas was 10 years old, he asked about how his parents had met. They were sitting at the dinner table, all 5 of them, and the question came out of nowhere. "Papa found Mama when she was sick," Sarah said confidently, though she had heard the story secondhand. "Not sick exactly," Rose corrected. "I was hungry, very, very hungry. I had not eaten in 5 long days." The children's eyes went wide. "5 days?" Thomas asked. "How did you not die?" "I almost did," Rose said honestly. "I'd used up all my strength just walking into town to try to find help. Your father caught me right before I collapsed, and he took care of me." "He cooked for you," Sarah remembered. "That is the romantic part." Elias laughed. "Is it romantic to cook for someone?" "When they are starving, it is," Rose said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "Your father cooked enough food for a week, and he just watched me eat. He did not ask for anything in return. He just wanted to help." "Then he fell in love with her," Thomas said, "because she was beautiful and brave." "Something like that," Elias agreed, "though I think I fell in love with her because she was strong. She had been through something terrible, losing her brother and nearly dying herself. But she did not give up. She kept fighting. That is what made me love her." "I fell in love with him because he was kind," Rose added. "Real kindness, not the kind that expects something back, just pure goodness. That is rare, and I knew I had found something special." Young William, who was only 3 and did not fully understand, asked, "Are you still in love?" "Every single day," Elias and Rose said together, making the children groan and laugh. After dinner, when the children were playing outside in the last light of day, Rose and Elias cleaned up the kitchen together. It was their routine, one of many they had developed over the years. She washed, he dried, and they talked about the day, making plans for tomorrow. "Do you remember what you said that first night?" Rose asked as she handed him a plate. "In the boarding house, when I asked why you were helping me? I said someone had helped me once, and I was passing the kindness along. Do you think that is what life is about? Passing kindness along?" Elias thought about it. "I think it is part of it, but I also think it is about finding where you belong and building something that matters. We have done that here, you and me. We have built something real." Rose finished the last dish and dried her hands, then turned to face him. "We have built something beautiful. And it all started because you caught me when I was falling." "I will always catch you," Elias promised, pulling her into his arms. "That is what love is, being there to catch each other when we fall." They held each other in the kitchen as the light faded outside, the sound of their children's laughter drifting through the open window. It was an ordinary moment in an ordinary evening, but it was also everything. This was what mattered. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but these quiet moments of connection and love. The children grew, as children do. Thomas became a capable ranch hand, working alongside his father and learning everything Elias could teach him. Sarah developed a talent for dealing with the townspeople, handling the business side of things with a charm and efficiency that impressed everyone. William was still young, but he showed signs of inheriting his mother's quick mind and his father's patient temperament. As they entered their second decade together, Elias and Rose were able to step back a bit from the constant hard work, trusting their older children to handle more responsibilities. They added a foreman to help with the ranch work, a young man from town who reminded Elias a bit of himself at that age, hard-working and honest. They took time for themselves now, riding out across their land together, picnicking by the stream that ran through the property, and sometimes just sitting on the porch in comfortable silence. Their love had matured, deepened, becoming something steady and unshakable. The passionate intensity of their early days had settled into something richer and more complex, a love built on years of shared experience, weathered storms, and countless small acts of devotion. One day, 15 years after that day in Socorro, Elias and Rose rode up to the highest point on their property, a rocky outcrop that offered a view of everything they had built. The house was larger now, a proper ranch house with multiple rooms and a wide porch. The barns and outbuildings were well-maintained and prosperous-looking. The fields were green with crops and dotted with livestock. In the distance, they could see Thomas working with the horses, Sarah in the dairy barn, and William playing with the dog they had gotten him for his birthday. "Look at all this," Rose said, gesturing at the view. "When Thomas brought me here, it was just a tiny cabin and a few acres. I could not imagine it becoming this." "Your brother would be proud," Elias said. "You honored his dream. You made it real and then made it even better." "We made it real," Rose corrected. "I could never have done this alone. If you had not found me that day, if you had not cared enough to help, I would have died in Socorro. This ranch, these children, this life, none of it would exist." Elias shook his head. "You would have survived somehow. You are too stubborn to die." "Maybe," Rose allowed, "but I would not have lived, not really. You gave me life, Elias, real life, full life. You gave me love and family and purpose. You gave me everything." "You gave me the same," Elias said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was so lost before you, just drifting through life. You gave me a home. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning. You gave me a family. I am the one who should be grateful." "Then let's both be grateful," Rose said, leaning against him. "Grateful for that day, grateful for each other, grateful for all of this." They sat there for a long time, watching the sun move across the sky, watching their children go about their work, watching the life they had built together. It was a good life, not perfect but real and meaningful. They had faced hardships and overcome them. They had built something lasting, something that would continue after they were gone, passed down to their children and their children's children. As the years continued to pass, the ranch prospered even more. Thomas married a girl from town, a smart woman named Emma who fit into the family perfectly. They had children of their own, grandchildren who ran around the ranch and filled it with even more life and laughter. Sarah took over more of the business side, expanding their customer base to include several towns in the region. William showed an interest in breeding horses, developing a small but successful side business training and selling quality stock. Elias and Rose became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family tree grow and branch. They slowed down as age crept in, but they remained active and involved, still working when they could, still offering advice and guidance, still deeply in love. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were over 20 people now, counting all the children and grandchildren, and the house was full of noise and chaos. But it was joyful chaos, the sound of a family that loved each other. After dinner, when the younger children had been put to bed and the adults were sitting around talking, Thomas, their son, raised a glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, to my parents, who showed all of us what real love looks like. You two have built something amazing here, not just this ranch, but this family. You have taught us what it means to work hard, to stay committed, to love each other even when things are hard. Thank you for everything." Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the toast. Elias looked at Rose, saw tears in her eyes, and felt his own eyes sting. How had they gotten so lucky? How had that terrible day in Socorro, when Rose had been starving and desperate, led to all this beauty and love? Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed or to their own homes, Elias and Rose sat on the porch together, wrapped in a blanket against the cool evening air. The ranch was quiet, everyone sleeping, just the sound of crickets and the occasional call of a night bird. 30 years, Rose said softly. It does not seem possible. Best 30 years of my life, Elias replied. Mine too, though the first 5 days were rough. She laughed softly. I still remember that meal you cooked me in the boarding house, bacon and eggs and potatoes. It tasted like heaven. You cried when you ate that bacon, Elias remembered, because I had been so hungry for so long, and you were so kind. You cooked enough food for a week, and you just watched me eat like it mattered to you that I was fed. It did matter. It mattered more than anything. Rose turned to look at him, her face soft in the moonlight. Despite the years, despite the lines and gray hair, she was still beautiful to him. Why did you do it, really? Why did you help me? Elias thought about it, trying to find the right words. I think I recognized something in you, he said finally. A kindred spirit, maybe. Someone who was fighting to survive, to make a life in a hard place. I wanted to help you fight, and then I fell in love with you, and helping you became the most important thing in the world. I am glad you did, Rose said. I am glad you caught me that day. I am glad you cooked for me. I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad for all of it, every moment, even the hard ones, because they led to this, to us, to our family. They sat there holding each other as the night deepened around them, comfortable in the silence, secure in their love. They had been through so much together, had built so much, had loved so deeply. And they knew, both of them, that whatever time they had left, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. The years continued their inexorable march. Elias and Rose slowed down even more, their bodies no longer able to do the hard physical work they had done for decades. But their minds remained sharp, and they stayed involved in the ranch operations, offering guidance and wisdom accumulated over a lifetime. They spent more time with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories of the old days, of how hard things had been when they first started, of the struggles and triumphs that had built the ranch into what it was. The children listened with wide eyes, unable to imagine their grandparents as young and struggling. On a warm day in early summer, when Elias was 70 and Rose was 65, they took one last ride together out to the cottonwood tree. It was harder now, getting on the horses, but they managed. They rode slowly, taking their time, enjoying the journey as much as the destination. At the tree, they dismounted carefully and stood hand in hand, looking at Thomas Daniel's grave. The wood marker had been replaced years ago with a proper stone, and Rose kept it clear of weeds and decorated with fresh flowers whenever she could. I have had a good life, Thomas, Rose said to her brother, better than I ever imagined possible. I wish you could have had the same, but I am grateful for the time we had together and for everything you taught me. I hope you are proud of what I have built here. He is, Elias said quietly. I am sure of it. They stood there for a while in the dappled shade of the cottonwood, remembering the past, grateful for the present. Then they rode slowly back to the ranch, to their family, to the life they had built together. Elias Northwood passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at the age of 72. He died in the house he had helped build, in the bed he had shared with Rose for decades, surrounded by his family. His last words were to Rose, a simple, I love you, that she held in her heart. Rose lived another 5 years without him, staying active and involved in the ranch operations until the very end. She missed Elias every day, but she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together, in the memories of their love. When she died at 70, she was buried next to her brother Thomas under the cottonwood tree, with Elias on her other side. Their graves were marked with a single large stone that read, Elias and Rose Northwood. They built a life together from nothing but love and hard work. Beloved parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. Together forever. The ranch continued to prosper under their children and grandchildren, a legacy of love and determination. The story of how Elias and Rose met, of how he had saved her when she was starving and then fallen in love with her, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a reminder that life could change in an instant, that kindness mattered, that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important thing you could do was catch someone when they were falling and then watch them eat, making sure they were fed and cared for and safe. And it was proof that from such a simple act, from one moment of compassion and one meal cooked with care, an entire beautiful life could grow, full of love and family and meaning. Elias and Rose's love story became part of the land itself, woven into the very fabric of the ranch, a testament to what two people could build together when they committed to each other and to a shared dream. Their great-grandchildren still worked the ranch, still told the story, still marveled at how a starving woman and a lonely cowboy had found each other in Socorro, New Mexico, all those years ago, and had built something that would last for generations. And in the retelling, the story became more than just history. It became a reminder of what mattered most in life: kindness, love, family, and the determination to build something meaningful even when the odds seemed impossible. The ranch that Rose's brother had dreamed of, that Rose had nearly died trying to keep, that Elias had helped her build, stood as a monument to their love and their hard work. And under the cottonwood tree, 3 graves rested in the shade, 3 lives intertwined forever, the beginning and the heart of a family legacy that would endure long after they were gone.